There is a particular kind of woman you have seen your whole life without ever truly seeing her. She is the one who refills your glass before you ask, who laughs at the right moment and goes quiet at the right moment, and never, not once, takes up more space than she was assigned. She is steady. She is gracious. She has beautiful posture. Or she used to. Before 40 years of making herself smaller, curved her spine into a question mark she was never allowed to finish asking. You have sat beside her in church pews. You have eaten at her table. You did not notice she was disappearing. Neither, for a long time, did she. At 69, Dahlia Yvette Carter owns almost nothing. Not the garden she kept for 3 decades, not the grandchildren whose middle names she chose, not the community that smiled at her every Sunday and has not called once since she left. The house, Thomas's house, she understands now, belongs to a version of her life that required her absence in order to survive. What she has: a suitcase, a room that smells of yesterday, and a crown of silver hair she spent years pinning down, hiding, apologizing for, now worn openly, like a flag planted in difficult ground. To everyone she has ever loved, she is the villain of this story. She has decided to tell it anyway. If you've ever felt like a background character in your own life, or if you believe it's never too late to plant your own flag, hit that like button and subscribe. We are diving into the chapters Dahlia was never allowed to write. Don't let this story go unheard. Before we go any further, if you are watching this and quietly thinking, "This is me," I want you to have something that took me a long time to put together. It is called Grey Divorce, The Long Marriage Exit, and it is completely free. It covers everything nobody sat you down to explain: the emotional ambush, the financial blind spots, the identity crisis that arrives after decades of being us and suddenly becoming just me again. The link is in the description right now. Do not wait until the end of this video. Go grab it, come back, and let's talk. Thomas never shouted. That was the thing people never understood, would never understand. When Dahlia eventually tried to explain what 40 years inside that marriage had felt like. There were no slammed doors, no split lips, no dramatic scenes that might have given her something concrete to point to, something a friend or a pastor or a judge might recognize as damage. Thomas was dependable. Everyone said so. He paid every bill before it was due. He showed up to every school play, every neighborhood meeting, every family funeral. Pressed, punctual, pleasant. He was the kind of husband other women referenced when they were disappointed in their own. A good provider, a steady hand. The sort of man, people said, that you don't leave. What they didn't see was how he held the money, not violently, quietly. The way a hand can rest on a bird's wing without crushing it, just firmly enough that the bird forgets, over time, that it ever knew how to lift. When Dahlia finished her English degree, the one she'd fought for, worked nights for, carried like a private flame through the early years of their marriage, Thomas didn't mock it. He simply made it irrelevant. There was no need for her to work, he explained. He would handle everything. And handling everything, she came to understand, meant she would handle nothing. No account in her name, no salary, no financial history that belonged to her alone. Every dollar passed through his hands first. He called it love, called it protection. And for years, too many years, she accepted the word he gave her for the thing she was living inside. It was only much later that she found the correct one. What cage? There is a way a woman learns to take up less space. It begins small. A softened opinion here, a swallowed objection there. A laugh offered up like a peace treaty. A dream folded quietly and slid beneath the mattress where no one will find it, least of all her. Dahlia learned early that the temperature of a home could be regulated by her silence, that Thomas's comfort was an architecture she was responsible for maintaining. And so, she maintained it, with the discipline of someone who understood, bone deep, that her feelings were a weather system nobody had asked for. 40 years of that kind of discipline leaves marks, not bruises. Nothing so legible. Something slower. The way her shoulders began to round inward, as though her body was finishing a sentence her mouth never started. And the way she stopped reaching for things on high shelves, stopped reaching in general. The way a woman who once had opinions about everything gradually became someone with opinions about nothing. Or so she told herself, until she could almost believe it. She called it peace. It was not peace. It was the posture of someone who had been quietly, systematically, told that her presence was tolerable only when it was invisible. The doctor used the word aggressive. Thomas used the word expensive. Not that evening. Not in front of the children, no. In front of the children, he was a portrait of devotion. He held her hand in the waiting room with the particular tenderness of a man who understood he had an audience. He accepted the casseroles neighbours brought to the door with a bowed head and a voice thickened just enough to seem undone. She's resting. Yes, it's been hard on all of us. Thank you. Thank you so much. But in the dark of their bedroom, with no one left to perform for, he set the medical bills on her nightstand the way you set an overdue notice on a counter, without looking at her, without breaking his stride. We need to sort this out, he said. Not you'll be all right. Not I'm frightened too. We need to sort this out. She lay there, 3 days post-diagnosis, her body already bracing for what was coming, and understood something she had been circling for decades, that she had never been his partner. She had been his arrangement. And arrangements, when they become inconvenient, get reviewed. She had rehearsed it in the dark for years. Not the words. The words were simple enough. 3 syllables. A breath and a half. What she rehearsed was the stillness afterward. The way the air in the room would change. The way Thomas would look at her. Not with fury, not with grief, but with the particular blankness of a man encountering something he had already decided was impossible. She said it on a Tuesday. No occasion. No dramatic weather. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast, and the television in the other room was murmuring about something nobody cared about. I'm leaving, Thomas. He turned slowly, set down his coffee cup with a carefulness that suggested he was already composing himself for an audience that hadn't arrived yet. Leaving where? And that was it. That was the whole 40 years compressed into 2 words. The assumption that she was a thing that moved only in relation to him, that she had destinations, not decisions. She didn't answer. There was nothing left to explain to a man who had spent 4 decades listening only for his own name. She simply walked out of the kitchen and did not turn around. The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when Thomas moved. Not out. Thomas never moved out. He simply rearranged the world so that Dahlia had nowhere left to land. First, the accounts. 40 years of a shared life, converted quietly into numbers that belonged, suddenly, entirely to him. She had not known to watch for it, had not known to watch for anything, because watching implied suspicion, and suspicion implied ingratitude. And Dahlia had spent 4 decades being grateful for things that were slowly consuming her. The bank statement arrived on a Tuesday. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor. Her kitchen, her tiles, the grout she had cleaned on her hands and knees every spring, and understood for the first time that she had been living inside someone else's fortress all along. Thomas did not need to raise his voice after that. He never had. He simply made a few phone calls. By Sunday, the story had already settled into the pews like weather. She heard it second-hand, then third, then in the careful silence of women who had once called her sister. That Dahlia had become difficult, erratic, that the stress of age had done something to her. You know how some women get. That Thomas, patient Thomas, dependable Thomas, had tried. Lord knows he had tried. No one called to ask her side. Why would they? She had spent 40 years building a version of herself that was agreeable, invisible, untroubling. She had been so convincing that even the people who loved her found it easy to believe she had simply, finally, malfunctioned. She had given them no other version of her to hold on to. That was the part that kept her awake, not Thomas, herself. She had expected Thomas to be cruel. That, at least, made sense. The wounded pride of a man whose silence had always been mistaken for strength. What she had not prepared for, what no part of her 40 years of endurance had thought to rehearse, was her daughters. They came together. That was the first wound, that they had planned it, had sat in someone's kitchen and agreed on the words before they arrived at her door. Renee spoke first, the way she always had, chin lifted in a way that reminded Dahlia, with a grief that had no bottom, of herself at 30. The message was clean, surgical, delivered without the courtesy of tears. Their father had provided. Their father had stayed. Their father had not, as Renee put it, chosen herself over her family. Dahlia noticed the phrasing. Chose herself. As though self-preservation were a form of theft. The grandchildren would not be coming to visit, not until things stabilized. Another word they had agreed on in advance, she could tell. Stabilized. As if she were a weather system. As if 69 years of living had left her too volatile to be trusted near small children who loved her, who had fallen asleep in her lap not 3 months before any of this. She did not beg. She had spent 40 years perfecting the art of not begging, and that, it turned out, was the one skill the marriage had given her worth keeping. She stood in the doorway of that bone-white room and watched her daughters walk back toward the life she had built and surrendered, and she understood something then. Quiet, terrible, and clarifying. Some losses don't arrive like storms. They arrive in familiar faces, wearing your own eyes. 5 years is long enough to stop waiting for the phone to ring. Dahlia learned that the way you learn most true things, not in a single moment of clarity, but slowly, like eyes adjusting to a room with very little light. The daughters had not called. Thomas had remarried, someone told her, without meaning to. The grandchildren were growing up in photographs she was not in. She had a room now. A real one. Not borrowed, not temporary. A narrow thing above a hardware store on Clement Street, with a radiator that knocked through the night like an old neighbour who couldn't sleep. She had learned to find it comforting. 3 mornings a week, she walked 4 blocks to Between the Lines, a second-hand bookshop the colour of burnt amber run by a woman named Jocelyn, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had, on their very first meeting, looked at Dahlia across a stack of dog-eared paperbacks and said simply, "You look like someone who has survived something." Dahlia had not known what to do with being seen that clearly. She had stood very still, the way you do when a bird lands near you and you don't want to frighten it away. She volunteered there now, straightening shelves, recommending novels to strangers, making tea in the back room while Jocelyn argued cheerfully with suppliers on the phone. It was quiet work, honest work, the kind that asked nothing of her except her presence. And her presence, she was slowly learning, was enough. At 74, Dahlia Yvette Carter stood a little straighter, not because anything had been restored to her, but because she had finally stopped bracing for the next loss and discovered that what remained, once you stopped shrinking around it, was not nothing. It was a life. Hers. Fully, irrevocably hers. Moral lesson 1. Your past sacrifices are a testament to your love, not a life sentence to keep giving what you have left. 2. Keeping the peace by erasing yourself is not harmony. It is a quiet, uncelebrated disappearance. 3. Love that requires your silence in exchange for its staying was never love. It was a contract you never agreed to sign. 4. Beginning again at 70 with nothing but courage is still, undeniably, a beginning. 5. When everything borrowed is finally gone, what remains is the only thing that was ever truly yours, yourself. If this video reached something real in you, if it named something you have been carrying alone, then you already know you need this ebook. Grey Divorce, The Long Marriage Exit, is sitting in the description below, completely free, waiting for you to claim it. Not tomorrow. Not after one more scroll.